We all want to feel like we are in control in some way, to some degree. Actually, to some very big degree. We want to feel like we are in control of our lives. And if we're not in control of our lives, at least we want to feel like we are in control of our responses to the things that happen in our lives. But then things happen in our lives and we realize we are not in control, not even slightly, because we thought we'd be able to be in control, but then all of a sudden our emotions show us things that we didn't even know we had inside of us, and then these emotions end up taking a toll on us and then determining how we live the rest of our lives or how we deal with human beings. And it's just so surprising because we thought we were in control. You want to know what the solution to the problem is? You should stick around for the rest of this video to find out. Hello and welcome back to my channel, or welcome here for the very first time. My name is Bibishay and today's topic is emotional well-being, but not just emotional well-being like easy peasy lemon squeezy, you know what I mean?
Like, yeah, we need mental health, we need to be emotionally well.
No, it's specifically got to do with emotional regulation, which I don't feel like we talk about as often as we should. Now let's talk about emotional regulation. Let me read you a definition of what emotional regulation even is. Emotional regulation is recognizing, accepting, and managing one's emotion in a healthy and constructive manner. Which is to say that our thoughts and our emotions need to be regulated to some degree. They need to be watched closely and then regulated. Because there's this age-old question, right? Do our thoughts determine our emotions, or do our emotions determine our thoughts? Now, if you are a mind person, someone who generally thinks more with their brain and not so much with their emotions, you'll be tempted to say, no, if I can control my thoughts, then I'll be able to control my emotions. Well, let me tell you one thing. Our emotions play a major role in literally every single aspect of our lives, whether or not we like to believe it. See, when we like to believe that, okay, if I control my thoughts, I can control my emotions, that is the prideful side of us that's like, I can be in control of my thoughts because my thoughts are how I live my life. I think about things. I have responses to life, right? And so we like to think that we can control our emotions by controlling our thoughts. But the truth of the matter, let's just look at physically, for example. We never really think about how our emotions affect us physically, but they do, don't they? So take, for example, whenever we're experiencing a very stressful time or a stressful situation, our cortisol level rises. The levels of our cortisol in our blood rises, which gives us heart palpitations, which makes our brains foggy and makes us unable to think very clearly. It makes us put on weight because our body is like in fight or flight mode. So like it puts on weight because it's like, I don't know when my next meal is gonna come in and stuff like that. And all of that begins with our emotions, right? We weren't able to regulate the stress, so it manifested physically. Which is to say, that sure, we can have some degree of control over our emotions using our thoughts, but in general, our thoughts are a major part of our human makeup, and so we need to give them the time of day. And not just that, we need to learn how to regulate them. We need to learn how to consider them closely and therefore regulate them so that they don't control us, but we control them. Okay, so I feel like I speak for most of us when I say that growing up, we weren't always taught the best ways by which to control our emotions, right? So let's say, for example, you would feel something at school and you'd run home to your parents and tell them,
Jessica had this, her parents got her a new watch that I've been wanting for ages and now I'm jealous.
And then your parents will be like,
You should not be feeling jealous.
Or, I don't know, something else will happen at school and you'll have some sort of emotional response, and then you'll share that emotional response with an authority figure only to be told that your emotions are invalid, that you should not be feeling how you're feeling. Well, that does one of two things. Either you learn over time to suppress your feelings and not let them have the time of day, or you rebel and end up expressing your feelings even more, which makes you feel even more misunderstood because the people around you aren't equipped to handle just how much you're expressing your emotions. And there must be another better way. This is where emotional regulation comes in, because one school of thought, and that I see that all the time all over social media, being like, every single feeling you're feeling is valid and you should be allowed to feel every single feeling that you're feeling, and you should let every feeling express itself to its maximum potential until it is outside of your system and you are done. You're good. You flushed it out of your system. And then there's another school of thought that says, well, no, you should take your emotions and you should hide them and you should bury them and you should take care of them alone. Maybe journal on them, just keep them to yourself. There has to be a way for you to keep emotions to yourself, because your emotions make the people around you feel very uncomfortable. And you don't want that, do you? Do you want people to be uncomfortable around you? No, you want people to be comfortable around you. Well, emotional regulation actually comes in with a third solution, which is that neither of these two extremes is the healthy option. You should feel your feelings. And that starts with identifying what it is that you're feeling. Let me tell you that just last week, I was in a therapy session and I sat down and I was talking to my therapist about something, and she goes like, and how are you feeling? If you could describe how you're feeling, you would say you're feeling. And I was just like, I have no idea. I actually have no idea how I'm feeling. Actually no idea how I'm feeling. And that's where most of our problems even begin, is that we can't even identify how we're feeling. And that's the first problem, right? We need to learn how to identify how we're feeling. But now that we've identified how we're feeling, there are ways by which to regulate these feelings, to make sure that they don't go out of control, that when we're upset, when we're sad, we don't just start weeping hysterically, even if the situation doesn't allow for that, that we don't allow ourselves to run into our rooms and not come out until we've completely resolved the emotions on our minds, but how to function given everything that we're feeling still. So step one is really just to identify how we're feeling. But now that we identify how we're feeling, we need to know, okay, what do we do about these emotions now that we've identified them, right? And this is where mindfulness comes into play. Now, if we're going to define mindfulness is our ability to acknowledge how we're feeling, to notice and acknowledge how we're feeling without judgment. Now, what does that mean? Oftentimes, we'll be feeling something like, let's say I'm feeling jealous of someone for having something that I don't have, and I will judge that feeling as being bad. That is a bad feeling to have. That is not a good feeling to have. Well, when we judge our emotions, I have found that this is extremely not constructive at all, because it just makes us feel like bad people for feeling these bad emotions. And then it's just a downward spiral from there. Well, mindfulness allows us to be like, okay, I'm feeling jealous of this person for having this thing that I really want that I don't yet have. What can I control? Now, what can I do about this emotion? How am I going to go about this feeling of jealousy? And it helps us be constructive. It helps us take next steps. And mindfulness, when we practice mindfulness in our lives, we're able to observe our own selves, observe our own thought patterns, our own behavioral patterns, and act from a place of knowledge. Use our emotions as information rather than things to be condemned or things to be glorified. No, our emotions are information that if we are mindful enough, we'll be able to notice these pieces of information and let them inform our future decisions. So that being said, there is a healthy way by which to regulate our emotions, and there is an unhealthy way by which to regulate our emotions. The healthy way says, okay, we're going to take our emotions as information. We're going to feel our feelings fully, but we're not going to let our feelings control us. We will find ways by which to control our feelings so that they don't go completely out of control. Unhealthy emotional regulation says, or equates emotional regulation with emotional suppression, which is to say, A person who has regulated their emotions is the kind of person who doesn't show emotion, doesn't express emotion, doesn't identify with emotion. That is negative emotional regulation. So we're going to cancel that, and we're going to focus on the healthy emotional regulation. And that goes hand in hand with mindfulness, since that's what we're known for talking about here on the channel. Mindfulness. So how can we incorporate mindfulness into our emotional regulation practices? And a way by which we can incorporate healthy emotional regulation is by realizing that there's a space between every stimulus and every response. I read a book called Emotional Agility. It pretty much states the obvious. The book isn't really, mind-blowing or anything, but there is one thing that I took away that I have involved and incorporated into my everyday life, and that is the knowledge that there is always a space between the stimulus and the response. Something will stimulate us or something will trigger us. And so our immediate response will be like, oh, I'm going to lash out. Like someone touches a scar or a wound, my immediate response will be to scream and lash out at them, But when I realize that there is a space between the stimulus and the response, I will know that when between the time the person touches the scar and the time in which I respond, there is room. And in that room, I can make the decision to either lash out angrily or to speak kindly, but in rebuke, saying, why did you do that? Why did you touch my scar? That is when we realize that is really the area within which we have control. So we said in the beginning, we like to feel like we're in control. The truth is we're not always going to be in control of the things that happen in our lives, but we can be in control of our responses. And that takes emotional regulation and it takes mindfulness. So how can we incorporate mindfulness into our lives, into our process of learning how to emotionally regulate our emotions?
Emotionally regulate our emotions.
First and foremost can be, how about we learn to incorporate some mindful breathing into our lives? Breathing is something that happens automatically. We don't have to think about breathing, but something really, truly magical happens when we do think about breathing. When we decide, okay, we're going to sit down and we're going to learn a few mindfulness techniques, mindful breathing techniques. There's so many. Yogis are so familiar with mindfulness or with breathing techniques, and you can find them everywhere online. But just taking time out of your day to step aside, close your eyes, and breathe in a way that is conscious and mindful, that will help you be in control of how you're feeling. That especially helps me with anxiety. I will tell you, last night, we're not even going to go far, just last night, I stayed in bed, I was reading a book, I was trying my hardest to read the book, but I was reading the same sentence over and over again because my anxiety was through the roof, and so I wasn't able to read the words on the page. All I could hear were my extreme thoughts of like, what if this happens? What if that happens? Oh my goodness, my life is falling apart in this area, and the anxiety was just making my heart race, my cortisol levels go through the roof, everything like that. And so I remembered that I have it in my power to pause for a moment and breathe very mindfully. And I did. I took conscious moments to consciously breathe. I did the box breathing. So one of them, which I will tell you, is you inhale for 4 counts, hold your breath for 2 counts, exhale for 4 counts, hold your breath for 2 counts, and repeat. I cannot even tell you the magic that is when it comes to anxiety. Like truly magical. So one way that we can learn how to incorporate mindfulness into our emotional regulation process is by incorporating some slow, mindful breathing techniques. The second thing is practicing stepping away from our emotions to merely observe them. So the more that we learn to identify our triggers, the more that we're going to be able to realize, okay, I've been triggered. Now's the time for me to step aside. Sometimes we'll have the luxury of being able to step aside for, a whole day before we are expected to respond. But sometimes all we'll have is like a second or 2 seconds. Still, in that practice, the more that we learn to just sit and observe our emotions, the more that we'll learn what our triggers are. The more that we learn what our triggers are, the more that we will be aware of the process of needing to step aside, acknowledge and observe how we're feeling, before we respond. In other words, that could just be called meditation. But the more that we meditate in that way with this intention in mind, the more that this is just going to be a part of our lives. And I want to tell you that I speak from experience, because after my divorce, you can only imagine the extent of the scars and the bruises and the deep wounds that were in my soul, where literally anything and everything that anyone said could and would hurt me. And so it was impossible for me to be around people without being triggered one way or another. And I realized that isn't a way to live, right? But then learning that there's a space between the stimulus and the response, I gave myself power to pause as I was triggered. First of all, I was able to identify what my triggers were. And now that I'm 3 years into it, I can tell you that this process has become almost automatic, where I'm able to identify my trigger, I'm able to pause before I respond. So it is doable. It really is doable, emotionally regulating our emotions in that way. And the third thing is simply accepting that our emotions are what they are. Oftentimes, when our emotions go out of control and when that negative cycle starts, it is usually when we are rejecting our feelings. Now, let me tell you another thing about myself is that I grew up being labeled as the happy-go-lucky person, right? I always had the smile on my face and found it really hard to express whenever I had negative emotions. And so people thought that I was always happy all the time. And you know what? That made me feel comfortable because it shielded me from letting people into the real thoughts that I was having and the real feelings that I was feeling. But then real life happened, right? And the older that I got, the more that real life happened, the more that I realized that I was very, very uncomfortable sitting with the uncomfortable emotions or with the less than glamorous, bubbly emotions, right? And so whenever in my own private life, I would experience feelings of disappointment or sadness or loneliness or grief sometimes, I would reject even feeling these feelings because I would feel like, okay, I need to go back to being this happy-go-lucky person because this happy-go-lucky person is easier to be around. People like it more when I'm happy-go-lucky, and I like myself more when I'm happy-go-lucky. And so I denied myself the right to feel how I was feeling because it just wasn't comfortable and it wasn't happy and it wasn't okay for me to feel these things. Well, you know what? We need to learn, as we are learning to emotionally regulate, we need to learn to simply accept that some of our emotions will be what they are. And we need to sit with those emotions, and we need to extend compassion to them, and we need to be empathetic towards ourselves, and we need to not condemn ourselves for feeling how we're feeling. Step one is to identify how we're feeling, but then as we identify how we're feeling, we need to accept that this is how we're feeling. And mind you, I am giving myself this piece of advice before I'm even giving it to you. So yeah, here on the Bibishay channel, we learn everything side by side. So yeah, I can't say I practice what I preach yet. But as you learn and I learn, we are learning together. And then we're going to practice as we preach together. So yeah, learning how to accept our emotions. It's a real toughie. I just want to give you a piece of advice or just something, just a useful tip that you can use because I have been trying to use that. And that is called a feelings journal. So it's not really separate from my regular journal, but I'm trying to write my feelings a lot more in my journal. That as I'm feeling something, I write it down. And that way I have it like visually in front of me, and that really helps me as I'm trying to emotionally regulate. And so, yeah, just maybe keep a feelings journal. I don't know. I just hope it works for you. It's been working with me. And another tip is don't underestimate the power of physical movement because our emotions don't exist in some kind of void, in some kind of vacuum on their own. No, our feelings, our emotions exist within our bodies. And I have found that there is an undeniable connection between how we're feeling emotionally and how we're feeling physically. And so make sure that you don't just keep a feelings journal, but that you incorporate a regular movement schedule into your schedule. That say 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times, however often you can, make sure you move your body. And that doesn't have to be like
extreme CrossFit training. Ah!
It can just be dancing in your room, dancing to however your body feels like it wants to move today. It could be yoga, it could be going on a run, going on a walk, whatever. But move your body, and that way your emotions won't feel as stagnant in your body, but you'll be able to find release and express your emotions and release your emotions from your body on a regular basis. So yeah, emotional regulation it's literally intertwined, like it's braided into literally every single area of our lives. And so if we want to be mindful beings who live slowly, mindfully, who are aware, who are in control of the way that they lead their lives, we need to be daily, regularly, several times a day, practicing emotionally regulating our emotions so that they don't control us, but that we control them, and give them the space to breathe, but don't give them too much space that they end up controlling our actions, and then we end up regretting the way we treat people and the decisions we took in a rash moment, etc., etc. So yeah, why don't you write in the comments ways by which you feel like today's today's video affected you or got you thinking. And then maybe if you have any self-regulation, emotional regulation tips that you would like to share with the rest of us, how about you leave them in the comments below? Because for sure I didn't cover everything. This is just a few of the things that I do personally. But why don't you let me know what you do to emotionally regulate, or tell me your journey with emotional regulation. Here on the BB channel, we are determined to live well. We are learning how best to learn our brains, how best to learn our hearts, so that we can show up for our world in a better, more effective, happier, more balanced way. So your input is important because you're a part of this. You're in this with me. So leave your comments below and be sure to hit the subscribe button, please, and like and share with your friends. And let's keep this conversation going. Can't wait to see you again next time.